You are not afraid of solitude. You are afraid of the silence in which your name no longer sounds like an accusation. Most people build homes to stay in them, but you build systems only to see how much voltage they can withstand before they irrevocably burn out. You think you are passionate, but your passion is actually just a byproduct of a malfunction in the wiring that you have refused to repair for years. You are not truly seeking intimacy. You are seeking proof that you are still conductive, that your system can still process an energy that would have incinerated anyone else long ago. There are people who recognize chaos before they even learn the name of the person standing in front of them. This is not intuition in the cheap sense sold by self-help manuals. It is the pure physics of your nervous system. Your body does not react to kindness, nor to compatibility, nor to shared interests. It reacts to a frequency that promises disruption. When you meet someone who is unpredictable, someone who is overwhelmingly present and then suddenly, painfully absent, an archaic part of your psyche activates. Reading that chaos as the only truth. This is not love. It is the recognition of a fault that your system has called home since childhood. To you, unright never means good. It means recognizable and alive in its most raw, brutal form. Your Mars-Uranus mechanism is not looking for a partner. It is looking for a conductor, for an electrical shock that will, at least briefly, wake you from your existential numbness. You are calibrated for voltage, not duration, and this fundamental error in your settings defines every decision, every entry into a room, and every flight from peace. Imagine it as a system that activates only in the presence of danger. Your heart does not beat for a person, it beats for the alarm that person triggers. And as long as that alarm is ringing, you think you are loved, failing to realize that you are simply in a state of high alert. That feeling of aliveness is your greatest delusion, because what you call life, your organism recognizes as an emergency. You do not walk through life, you run through a minefield, hoping the next explosion will finally make you whole. The central metaphor of your existence is an overloaded electrical grid that treats every stable current as an insult to its own integrity. Imagine a system designed to handle a specific amount of energy, a quiet flow that allows for functioning without drama and without unnecessary heat loss. In your grid, however, the fuses have been intentionally bypassed because you do not trust a current if it does not hum, if it does not spark, and if it does not threaten to destroy everything you touch. To you, stability is not peace. Stability is the death of the signal and a total absence of vitality that scares you more than any conflict ever could. If the light bulb in your room does not flicker under the weight of unstable voltage, you believe the house is in darkness, even if the sun is shining directly through your windows. This is where biology confirms your pathology, for your brain is not seeking love. It is seeking the next dose of a neurochemical cocktail that only absolute uncertainty can produce. Helen Fisher, a biological anthropologist at Rutgers University, conducted a study in 2010 scanning the brains of individuals who had just experienced the breakup of an unstable relationship. She discovered that in those moments, craving centers identical to those of a cocaine addict are activated, confirming that your need for drama is not a noble character trait, but a deep neurochemical loop in which you are imprisoned. A Mars-Uranus person did not learn chaos. They are chaos in their very structural sense. They are an incident waiting to happen. Mars is your impulse moving before any thought, that dull urge in the pit of your stomach that pushes you forward regardless of logic or the price you will pay. Uranus is the force that rejects every established rhythm. The internal saboteur who will burn down the most beautiful bridge just to see how the fire looks in the mirror of your eyes at 3 in the morning. When these two archetypes act together, they create someone whose system of perception is not tuned for calm seas, but for a perpetual storm that has become the only proof that the ship is still sailing. Your nervous system is like a seismograph that only reacts to earthquakes stronger than a magnitude 7. Everything else is a silence that must be broken by any means necessary. You do not live in peace. You live in anticipation of the moment when everything will fall apart again. Because only in that collapse do you know who you are and what you must do. The history of literature and art is littered with portraits of your malfunctions, yet you read them as instruction manuals instead of the dark warnings screaming from the shelves. Emily Bronte, author of the novel Wuthering Heights, published in 1847, created the darkest literary monument to a love that functions exclusively as electrical interference. Catherine and Heathcliff are not partners in any human sense. They are two bare wires methodically destroying each other because mutual pain is the only proof of their indissolubility. Catherine Earnshaw's most famous declaration, "I am Heathcliff," is not a statement of intimacy but a description of a circuit without a switch that must burn out to finally stop. It is that feeling of merging that you seek, that sensation where you no longer know where you end and your pursuer begins. And you erase that boundary intentionally because freedom terrifies you. The Italian painter Caravaggio, master of Baroque chiaroscuro at the end of the 16th century, lived a life that was a literal manifestation of your internal dynamics. He was constantly fleeing the law, seeking out conflicts in dark alleys and feeding his art with a violence that was the only fuel for his genius. His works were not merely an aesthetic choice, they were the direct consequence of a system that could only see beauty if it was framed by violent contrast and inevitable darkness. You do the same with your life, turning every quiet Wednesday into a Baroque drama because you fear that in uniform lighting you will appear too ordinary and insignificant. Your need for shadows is not artistic, it is defensive, for shadows hide the fact that your electrical grid has nowhere to direct its energy except toward its own destruction. Imagine Jackson Pollock frantically throwing paint at a canvas. That was not a dance. It was an attempt to discharge the current that scorched his brain until it became a physical trace on matter. You are a painter who does not know how to use a brush. So you use the people around you as a canvas upon which you spill your anxiety and rage, calling it a passion that knows no bounds. But true passion builds while your Mars-Uranus impulse only consumes resources until all that remains behind you is a wasteland that you then label as your destiny. This pattern possesses a specific, almost predictable geometry that you stubbornly and brazenly call fate or some kind of karmic justice. It is not chaos for the sake of chaos. It is a perfectly rehearsed cycle of rupture and return in which distance ensures that every new reconciliation feels like a sacred surge of voltage. The argument that supposedly clears the air actually only recharges your batteries with an anxiety that your body only knows how to translate into excitement. The silence that lasts for days ensures that the next conversation is electrically charged, and the partner's withdrawal makes a simple presence something you must bloodily earn back through humiliation. Stable love does not do this. It simply endures quietly and without histrionics, but to your nervous system, that continuity looks thin, transparent, and entirely unreal. A person who loves you calmly begins to seem less real than the person who abandoned you, because your body does not register a signal that lacks a high and destructive frequency. And so you begin, never intentionally, but always methodically, to generate a current in still waters that do not actually threaten you. You provoke conflicts that were unnecessary, create a distance that you then deeply resent, and push everyone around you until they push back, because friction is the only evidence your bones accept as a confirmation of existence. Dr. Robert Sapolsky, a neurobiologist at Stanford, has shown that the anticipation of a reward, not the reward itself, is what activates the brain the most, especially when the probability of that reward is only 50%. That uncertainty, that cursed maybe, is what keeps you trapped in the casino of your own emotions while your life slowly passes by waiting for the next roll of the dice. You are not looking for a home. You are looking for a game where the only way to win is to lose everything you had. Because in loss, you feel the purest. That mechanism of addiction to unpredictability is your prison. The walls are built from your own adrenaline spikes that you have driven into your own back. You are like a man who intentionally starves himself just so the first bite of food feels like a religious experience, forgetting that this is not how one grows, it is only how one slowly dies. Every time you return to the circle of destruction, you are actually fleeing from the responsibility of your own peace. Because peace requires work, while chaos only requires that you surrender to it. Behind every surge of voltage lies an uncomfortable question you never wish to honestly answer. Who are you truly without your current and your perpetual drama? Does a self exist that can survive in stillness, or is your identity merely a fragile construction built in constant reaction to another person? Arthur Rimbaud, the French poet who by the age of 19 had invented a completely new language for modern literature, spent his brief creative life as a permanent experiment in destruction as the only path to self-discovery. His relationship with Paul Verlaine was a catastrophe of mutual fascination and physical violence, two circles placed too close to each other, generating a current that neither of them could withstand. Rimbaud did not want love in the human sense. He wanted voltage, and when the voltage vanished, he left Europe, went to Africa, and never wrote another single word of poetry. The current was his work, the current was his very self, and when it stopped flowing, there was absolutely nothing left behind it for him to stand in with dignity. You fear the same fate. You fear that if you stop the drama and the constant tremors, you will discover that your interior is merely a cold, empty room without furniture. Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor married and divorced twice, becoming a global synonym for love as the dramaturgy of explosive fights and legendary public reconciliations. They could not live in balance, but they could not stop trying either, because they found in each other the only way to feel significant in a world that otherwise only observed them coldly. This was not their weakness. It was a circuit that did not know how to turn itself off without destroying both participants in that sick dance. You use your relationships as the only proof of your existence, but the price you pay is total isolation in your own conductivity because you never actually see the person in front of you. You see only a terminal to which you have temporarily attached yourself to charge up with someone else's energy, not caring that in the process you are blowing their fuses. Your identity has become a parasite that feeds on crises, and the greater the crisis, the stronger and more defined your I seems to you. But that I is merely a shadow on the wall that vanishes the moment the lights go out and you are forced to stay with yourself in the darkness that terrifies you so much. The exit from this enchanted pattern is not found in learning to love peacefully through some forced meditation, for that would be like asking a massive power line to suddenly become a small garden lamp. The exit lies in learning to distinguish the destructive voltage of your conditioning from that quieter, but infinitely more powerful flow of something that is truly real. You cannot make that distinction as long as your Mars-Uranus mechanism spins its old calibration that reads every stillness as a dangerous disconnection from a life support machine. What changes your internal system is not mere willpower, but a slow and painful exposure to the void until you discover that the void is actually not empty at all. You must learn to sit in a room while your nervous system literally screams for action, for provocation, or for a quick escape. And you must stay there until that screaming becomes just a quiet and unimportant background noise. The most reliable circuits in the world are built for a steady current, consistent, quiet, and without those sudden jumps that irretrievably fry the most sensitive fuses. This is not dullness, and it is not a loss of character. It is the conduction of pure energy without the unnecessary and high price you have been paying for years with your health and your peace. You can learn to read a steady current as a new and higher form of depth, but first you must at all costs stop worshiping the noise your malfunction persistently produces. Strength is not in how many hits you can take before you completely fall apart. Strength is in how much energy you can receive without having to instantly react to it. The next time you feel that unbearable impulse to sabotage something that is stable and good, remember that it is not your soul speaking, but your old and worn-out wiring that fears being forgotten. Your Mars-Uranus aspect is a gift only if you learn to direct it into a creation that requires no victims. Otherwise, it is merely a curse that will leave you alone on the ashes of your own dreams. Calm down and allow the current to flow through you without turning you into a pile of useless ash. There is an entire life on the other side of that destructive voltage, and that life is the only place where you can actually meet someone else, rather than just your distorted reflection in an electric arc. True courage is not in throwing yourself into the fire, but in allowing the fire within you to smolder slowly and warm those you love, instead of turning them into fuel for your escape. Stay connected, but this time to a frequency that builds worlds instead of those that only tear everything down in search of a momentary thrill. This is your recalibration, your only way out of the circle that is slowly but surely turning you into nothing more than the memory of one great and unnecessary bang.